All right, we'll get started here, right on time. Welcome back from the break and from lunch. Thank you for joining us for a session on smart base, smart posts, and connected communities. My name is Shivaji Sengupta, and I'm part of AFCEA International's Homeland Security Committee. I lead the subcommittee on innovative technologies, and regularly addressing new age technologies like quantum computing, supply chain, smart city, smart base, AI, ML, and stuff like that. I also have the pleasure of leading a company called NextKey Corporation, which does smart city work globally for the US federal government. And that is why I'm very passionate about this panel, where I put together and thank you for the panel to come together from various walks of life so it can give us interesting perspectives. So again, as Pat said, this session has been pre-approved to support certification maintenance for CompTIA, GAIC, CertNexus, cybersecurity certifications. So please scan your badges on the way out. That's definitely helps to give our certifications up. So a smart base is an area location that leverages technology, data, and connectivity to improve the quality of life for its personnel and residents, enhance sustainability, and provide a secure environment in which to operate. However, the increased use of technology and interconnections also pose a significant cybersecurity risk. Now, cyber actors always cause widespread disruption when they're successful, and one of the biggest challenges we're trying to face today is it's not only about information technology, but also about operation technology, an area we're going to focus on today. So without much ado, I wanted to introduce my panel. From the left, from your left to right, we have Mr. Peter Sartori, who is the programs branch chief for the Air Force Civil Engineering Center. And in his role, he manages the technical innovations that support the rebuild of the Tyndall Air Force Base from the effects of Hurricane Michael in 2018. Included in this position, he oversees the facility-related control system improvements and intrusion detection systems installed for the Milcon projects. Then we have Mr. Paul Wirtz, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Sherpa Works, providing consulting services to the Internet of Things, 5G, smart city, and other emerging technology. He recently retired from AT&T, where most of his career was focused on working with the federal government to develop and implement voice and data solutions. Then we have Mr. Dan Rhodes joining us from the partnership as part of the Director of Strategy in August to become the Chief Operations Officer for an NGO that supports Patterson Air Force Base, and he'll talk a little bit about what his NGO does. And last but not least, we have Mark from, and you guessed from his shirt, from Nokia, who brings the OEM perspective from a communication perspective, and will help us understand the intricacies of some of those challenges. So with that, I will just get us started. Again, the objective is, we're talking about smart bases today, largely from the operation technology perspective, and so we just kind of want to make this interactive as much as possible. I have a set of questions I've collected from stakeholders over the last few months, but I would encourage the audience to ask questions. So the first question, just to get us started, is just to ask the panel, where does the smart base begin and end? Is it just at the physical boundary? Is it at the gate? Because smart base involves civilians and military and contractors who live in and off base, and where does it start and end? So Peter, could you get us started with that, please?
So quickly, as he explained, I'm at Tyndall Air Force Base, which got wiped out by a hurricane. Devastated, a lot of the buildings, majority of the buildings, infrastructure was gone. So as a rebuilding that base, one of the things when the Secretary of the Air Force told us he doesn't want the base we had, he wants to build the base we need, the future. And so we are testing a bunch of innovative stuff. But we focused on resiliency, so we're doing new technology for our facilities. We pulled in from the Miami-Dade area, their hurricane standards, so we pulled in other community data. Our base We are looking at coastal resiliency, that's outside the Air Force property into the coast, into the water, and we're looking at oyster beds and other stuff to help protect our future, as well as, of course, technology. Where my office has been very focused on OT support, securing our OT networks. We have a lot of networks within the Air Force, whether it's EMCS, our environmental controls, our fire controls, fire alarm controls, our intrusion detection system from our security forces. We can't put them on our net where they're in their very siloed programs. My office is working on trying to secure them, providing that security through zero trust principles, as you are all aware of. But how we also, that helps us is now we can pull in information from Bay County as well as from their security, their flood, hurricanes. We can monitor from them, their emergency centers, onto the base now and pull our data and provide some of our data safely through them. So it does, we are working with our community on getting and releasing information on how all that works. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Dan, maybe you can give us a perspective from, because you also live close to a base, and your role also, if you could just expand on your role a bit.
Absolutely, would love to. Good afternoon, everybody. How you all doing? Awesome. So it's fascinating that you mentioned that you can't connect the systems to the base. How many people in here know that on the AFNet, and I'm sure it's the Army, same way of the Army system, you can't write code and execute code. You can't create executables on the system. So in our community, what we ended up having to do is create a software facility off base within its own network system to support software engineers that we have. So I'm down at Robins Air Force Base, and one of the things that we're looking at as a community is how are we working to provide the resources that the base needs for the future. That includes things like the manpower. That includes making sure that we have safe streets, reduce crime, making sure that our schools are good, making sure we have a lot of other assets that the services are looking at for the community. So when you talk about building smart bases and smart installations, it actually has to include the community as a part of that solution set too. You need both to be able to work together. So that's a real important aspect of this, and I'm absolutely super excited that we're talking about that today.
That's awesome. Thank you. So now switching gears from the telecom perspective, both from the big OEM and both from a vendor perspective, if Mark, if you can get us started, and then maybe Paul, you can chip in. Where the boundaries of smart city lie?
Thank you. So my name's Mike Loomis. I look after Nokia Federal Solutions. That's the division in Nokia that covers the federal government. We've built a number of networks, 5G and physical networks, supporting both IT and OT for the federal government. Notably, we were prime for, publicly, prime for the Hill Air Force Base, OUSD R&E 5G project on dynamic spectrum sharing. It's an interesting question, and I think from a network perspective, when you get into IT or the MWR use case, I think OT, you could say, hey, I can define that and I can physically constrain it, and sometimes we do that for security reasons for various clients, and physically constrain that infrastructure to the installation or a fixed area. But when you get into the IT or the MWR use case, looking at purely from the network, and it was an interesting analogy of the folks on the base coming on and off the base from the community, but when I look at the network connectivity, the second I touch the internet, I've now exposed that smart infrastructure globally. So you have to be prepared for bad actors around the world to attempt to penetrate that network, and there's lots of bad actors out there very interested in penetrating that network. It'd be a target of interest. So you could argue it's globally exposed in those use cases.
Great. Paul, your perspective?
That's actually a really interesting point. With a lot of cybersecurity solutions that are commercial for smart cities, they're implemented piecemeal. So you have generally cybersecurity risk at the seams. So where it's hosted, who's got access to it, what other data sources are on it, are really a problem. To your original question, Sivaji, where does it start and stop? I mean, the kind of crass answer is with the contracting or budgeting, right? We're limited so much by what we can do by the contract framework, but within the solutions, it's how do your solutions touch the constituency you have, whether it's the people that work on the base, the people who live on the base, the students, in many cities it's the tourists. So we were talking earlier about, like, say, solar panels. Georgia has a very aggressive solar panel project on military bases here. Most of that electricity that's generated is used by the public. It's a public-private partnership. But the ultimate goal at the back end was to make sure that the base had power in times of crisis. But you've got that excess power, how do you use it to benefit the community? So you have to look at who's touched and where they're touched all along the way.
Thank you, Paul. So I think taking up from there, Dan, if you can get us started understanding how does the smart base integrate with the broader military network and operations, considering your base is a depot, right?
So if you're looking at it purely from a operational perspective and these two characters right here, then yeah, it's going to be based on the dollars and cents. But in the end, it's about our communities and relationships that we're building. If you're not working with, and it may not be you guys, but it may be other people within your organizations that is working directly with the communities, with the politicians, with the educators, with the other folks that integrate the people, the kids that are being ultimately trained, the parents of the people that are working on that base and their children. You should be making sure that you're working with those communities and explaining to them what it is that you're even looking at in a cyber capability. What does a smart base mean, and how does that play out with the community overall? Because in the end, a lot of times, if you go to a lot of the political class, our mayors and county commissions and up the chain all the way to the federal, they don't know. They don't have any clue. They're going to look at their staffers and say, what does that mean? So being able to tell the story to them that gets them excited about it is really important. Because, oh, by the way, if they're not protecting their own systems, the systems on base are vulnerable as well. Because the types of services that our cities are providing the people in the community, those people in the community are then going to drive on base and start working. And if they're worried about what their families are doing, whether they have water, whether they have power, whether they have something else, they're going to be distracted from their jobs and not do as good a job on base, even if they make it. I happen to work at a base that of the 24,000 people that are there, only 6,000 are military. The rest are federal civilians. They have been embedded into the community for generations. You think they're going to be more interested in going to their job or their families if suddenly we don't have power going to the homes, if we have a lot of power down or something like that. So thinking through those solution sets and working with our communities to tell positive stories of why cyber protection is needed, why we need the smart base solutions. And oh, by the way, so what is the smart base? What is the smart community? What does that mean? What does it mean to that community? Because every community is going to be different. What are the types of technologies that you can get a hold of? Nokia is going to have a solution. AT&T and Cox and all the other ones are going to have different solutions, but what works best for that community? And then in my community, we have 5 political divisions. So you also have to think of, it's not just the cities, it's also the counties and the wider regions as well. So complex problem, but making sure that you're building the relationships and connections and having those discussions early and often helps to build the trust needed so that when you come and say, hey, we really got to get this implemented, we really need to develop a software factory in Middle Georgia, they go, okay, roger that, let's do it.
So Peter, means to you, you are doing pioneering work in terms of doing digital twinning of infrastructure and stuff like that. Can you just talk a little bit about the digital twin initiative that you have and how you integrate new initiatives within your digital twin architecture? Yes, sir.
So you talk about security, you hear security, here I think cybersecurity, but my office, we worry about physical security also. And we have this program, Digital Twin, where we're mapping our buildings. The nice thing about our base is most of the buildings are gone and we're replacing them all. And so the A&Es are handing us BIM models. So we're not having to rebuild the building that's existing. We're getting the models as it's being built. So we're able to build our digital twin up and create base map, and we're using it for traffic studies. We're using it to show what the effects are of just the ocean rising versus a hurricane effects. Another option thing we're looking at is we have a county school on our base, and one of the issues with county schools or any school is the shootings, right? And so what we've been able to do is we were able to build the digital twin of our building, and we're able to give it to our security forces and the local police department, and they're able to train on going through the building on what would happen if they actually had to ever respond. Simple things you don't think about, but like as you're going down the corridor, which way is the door going to open? They know ahead of time that door is going to open out versus in, what they have to approach it, how they do it. And so just using a modeling system like that, it seems like a game, but a video game when you watch it, but there's a lot of effects of it, and we just gave it recently to the engineers on the base, and they're going through it and trying to give us some feedback. Helps with digging permits. If you know where everything's at, it's a little easier if you can show it on a model too. Or like a flooding effect, if you can see that the water's rising and you can show the boss that if you let it go, if we don't evacuate, here's a picture of the car that's up to its door as opposed to just a model from above. So that's our digital twin is one of the examples.
Thank you, Peter. So Mike,
If you don't mind,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to add on a little bit. So we also did a digital twin in our community, not nearly as complex as theirs, and all of our buildings exist. But what we focused on is the application of artificial intelligence on the problem of crime in our community. So what we did is we put cameras, they're flock cameras, so license reader cameras on mobile trailers, and had artificial intelligence do the analysis on crime over time in the different areas of the city, and the AI determined where we needed to put those carts. What we discovered was, it did a really good job of decreasing crime in the areas where it was, and it had a residual effect over time. So because we were able to have that digital twin of the city and where crime was located, we could positively impact the amount of crime in the city because we could move those carts around and decrease crime overall in the community. Ultimately, that's an excellent use of it as well.
Thanks, Dan. So Mike, just over to you and Paul to talk about digital twinning in the communication space, because both of you bring different perspectives from a provider, OEM, and then from a vendor's implemented stuff.
I thought I might start with the question on integrating into the military networks, the broader military networks. And just a quick comment on that. Inherently, those smart city networks or smart-based networks are going to be based on internet protocol. So the interoperability between the military networks and the smart city networks is inherent. It's really a matter of security posture that you have to, that's the challenge of the integration of those networks. There's some interesting technology that I thought I would touch on, some tools. I mean, certainly there's cybersecurity experts that solve that problem. One nice feature that 5G brings to the table is the concept of network slicing. So we can parse the air interface and build completely separate VNFs inside the core of that infrastructure to provide completely disparate data paths between, say, an OT network and an IT network that can share that same infrastructure. Some other technologies, like one of my colleagues mentioned earlier, some of those military or operational networks may decide to run over the top of a smart city IP network that might be offering more MWR type services. In that case, it's a matter of zero trust. You know, whatever zero trust tools are being implemented for interactions with the internet of that operational network would apply there. And we do take, there's another relatively new, I think probably most folks have heard about this, but there's we take advantage of it, and it's new for us, at least in terms of how we deploy, but commercial solutions for classified are now out there with the NSA, and that's a way you can take approved solutions and integrate them into a more public network or a network that might touch the internet and secure it in an acceptable and approved way. So there's some nice tools that are coming out as well. So
Did I forget to mention that Mike is the guru of telecom and the most techie guy on this panel? Sorry, Paul, go ahead.
No, I didn't know you got to pick the questions you wanted to answer. You can't change the rules midstream like that. No, so when you're looking, so I was sitting here thinking, I did some data analysis like 30 years ago, right, where we were analyzing response times of ambulances in cities. And we were able to look at the data and post the ambulances and decrease response times. That's what the goal was. An unintended consequence or benefit of it was that we reduced overtime by like 50%. So immediately, management likes you saving money. Nowadays, when you have digital twinning and data at hand now, I can pull my network and I can do stuff instantly that would take me weeks to do, a decade or two ago. So digital twinning allows me to have a real life impact on my citizens, but also it reduces your response times for public safety, which reduces your insurance costs for your house. So these are things that just trickle down, and most people aren't really aware of that. So there are some real world implications that take time to show up, even though nowadays we have the ability to pull the data like that.
So moving from that perspective now, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And it'll be interesting to understand from a cost-benefit analysis of converting a traditional base into a smart base, how did you go about some of the work that you do, Peter?
So it comes back to, we had trouble trying to clarify the cost, because a lot of bosses, they want to see a number, what's it cost me in dollars for the equipment? Well, if you're going to cost more in dollars in the development of it, where do I get savings? For ours, one of the big programs we have is this program called IROC, and it's to our OT switches, and it allows us to remotely monitor some of our OT equipment. In the past, if an alarm went off on a building for their HVAC, you'd have to send a technician, he'd get the alarm, that's all he was told, it's an alarm. He'd have to go there, figure out what was going wrong, go back to the shop, get the parts, and then go back. That's back and forth for that technician. With our IROC, what we've done now is we've given the capability when the alarm goes off, they also know what building it is, exactly where it's a problem, and what they need to fix. And so at least it saves them a trip back and forth. The other big cost we're looking at within the Air Force for this IROC program is this is being done right now on one base, Tyndall. And we've just now got approval to expand it to 4 more bases. The advantage of that is how many here deal with the RMF and ATO process in the government? Yeah, it's a pain. Right now, the way it works is if a base, like at Tyndall, we use Siemens as our EMCS. So we have an ATO at the base for our Siemens equipment. You go to another base, they have an ATO for the same Siemens equipment. Go to another base, they have it for Johnson, Johnson, Johnson. With this system, what we're able to do now is get one ATO to cover the Siemens for the 8 bases that have it. The 12 bases that have Johnson, 1 ATO. So that means one person's working the ATO versus 12, 8 more here and there. That's a big savings that our bosses, plus time, are realizing, hey, maybe this will be working a lot helpful for us. That's where the cost savings are.
Beautiful. Paul, your perspective?
Quickly, one of the things that when you expand beyond bases, trend analysis, right? So when we're looking at cybersecurity, we're looking at risk analysis. If I see an impact to an HVA system or a building access control in one base, it's not such a problem. But if I'm looking at a dozen bases and all of a sudden I have access controls on a bunch of buildings on a bunch of different bases, I have a different kind of problem. And that's something that I could not see in the past. It would have been found in a postmortem. Quick answer.
Dan, since you address both sides of the inside and outside the base, your thoughts?
Absolutely. So one thing I would like to know is how many folks in here are connected to their communities, do volunteer work, get out there, know your mayor, do things like that. Are you guys involved in having these smart community discussions with your leadership?
It's so funny because I am,
Awesome.
and I can't wait when I can ask you a question.
Oh, man, set that up.
I have a
That's
prize for you,
fantastic.
sir.
So other ways that there are savings within communities. So if most of the time it's the city that is managing gas services, but in our city recently they had a problem with they had leaks. They knew it. You could go through an area of town and they could smell the leaks, but they didn't know where it was. If you had some of those type of systems embedded in there, they should be able to know when the leak is occurring, before it's occurring, before it's really noticeable, and know where to go to get it fixed. That's cost savings, because now they're not spending time digging holes all over the place trying to find that. Same thing with water. How about from a criminal perspective, if you have people that are feeding off the electrical system? If you have systems like this in place, you would know when you have a sudden spike in power demand at a particular location. Potentially, maybe they have a grow facility there. So from a community perspective, that's certainly a benefit. You get those same benefits on base, although if somebody's growing anything on base, then we're in trouble. Anyway, it's another conversation.
Mike?
Yeah, thank you. So Nokia does a lot of work in private wireless for enterprise as well, and I'll relate back to a scenario there and bring it back over to government. In a common use case that we see, and like we've got something like 500 global private wireless deployments in enterprise, but a very common one is maintenance savings. So preventative maintenance and deploying a smart warehouse or a smart ship or a smart grid is a very, very common one. We're deployed with a lot of utilities to monitor the operational equipment and deploy some sensors to predict when you're going to need to do a maintenance run prior to doing the maintenance run. So oftentimes you can get early predictors of equipment failure, send out the proactive maintenance as opposed to waiting for something to break, and you can schedule that maintenance in as opposed to reacting, and you can kind of keep the crews much more efficient from that perspective. And it's use cases like that that can often pay for the network deployment to build the smart grid or the smart warehouse or what have you. Our experience on smart bases, I apologize for the, maybe I just kill that. Our experience on smart bases with the OUSDRE use cases is the government's trying to figure that out, basically. They put a bunch of money into experiments. There were 15 bases chosen. 5G networks were put in place. Use cases are being run, and now they're in the process of analyzing those use cases and trying to build the business case on, hey, if we make this investment, we'll get this much utility or this much savings to afford the investment.
Great point, Mike. So on the back of that, starting with you, so keep that mic on. Can cybersecurity be embedded into the design process while creating new digital infrastructure and for a smart city, smart base?
Apologies, I was messing with
Sorry.
my mic.
Okay. The question is, can cybersecurity be embedded into the design process while creating new digital infrastructure for a smart base?
100%. I think that's where you start with cybersecurity. If you're thinking about cybersecurity after you built your network, it's already broken. And so I'll go through a few layers of that, but like the first thing you want is you want to work with an OEM that's thought about security in the design of the platform. So you need to secure the physical network elements and make sure that there aren't holes or backdoors into that equipment. It's properly protected, properly encrypted on the network element itself. Then you want to think about sort of the physical security of the network, making sure people can't get physical access into that equipment, drop taps in, things of that nature. You think about your network layer security, and that's more traditional security where you start to bring your firewall or your security tools in place into the perimeter of that network. And then we're taking it, and a lot of other companies, it's not specific to Nokia, but we have a tool that we call Cyberdome. It basically models a 5G network and pulls telemetry off of all the different network elements inside the network and on the UEs, which is what we call the devices that attach to the network. We pull that telemetry, we monitor, store that, perform, you call it AI on it, but we basically learn what the network should be operating like and what the normal behavior of a UE is on that network. And if you start to see anomalies on that behavior, then maybe you're in a condition where you need to do some investigation to see, do I have a breach? Is there a bad actor on the network? And so it's another tool in depth to kind of say, hey, something a little funny's going on in the network, should I take a closer look? So the short answer is, you start with security and then you build the network. If you go the other way around, you're going to have security issues on your network.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike, for taking the air out of the room from technical perspective again. So, Peter, coming to you, how did you do it? Because you actually did it from a design ground-up perspective.
Yeah, but funny part is the facility engineers, we started the buildings, our comm folks were waiting behind. They weren't sure what they were going to do. So our facilities, we really looked heavily into the infrastructure and the resiliency from hurricanes. We did ask, getting some of that other, but they're a little behind right now at our comm, trying to figure out what they need for fiber and such. I like to joke, the Air Force song ends with "Nothing can stop the U.S. Air Force, except when the internet's down or we don't have email, then we can't work." And matter of fact, my office today, they called me and said, if you haven't seen anything, it's because the internet's down, so we're not doing anything, which makes me worried. The supervisor, my folks aren't working because there's no internet. So cybersecurity is important, and we're still trying to work that. And so we're doing it within the buildings with our switches for the OT, but the comm, we're still struggling with that.
Thank you, Peter. So, Dan, let me talk a little bit about safeguarding critical infrastructure like utilities, because it impacts citizens, contractors, military personnel on and off base. So what measures do you think can be taken to safeguard those kind of critical infrastructure from cyber threats and other threats in general?
So here's the great thing. I am not a technical expert. You guys are.
We have Mike for that.
Exactly. So I would certainly rely on y'all to tell me what's required. So I'm the visionary guy. I go out there and say, hey, we need to have a completely autonomous supply chain system. How do we build that? And then these guys come in and tell me, no. Here's how that needs to occur. So what type of protections? I'm not that. So I would rely on these guys for that piece of it.
Awesome. So, yeah, Paul, please.
So rarely do we have the bonus that you have where you start from scratch, right? When you're looking at building cybersecurity into something, one of the things we ran into with the military quite often is you've got systems that are 30, 40, 50, 100 years old. That how do you address cybersecurity in something, especially in OT, that was designed before the internet, but has now been kind of grafted onto the internet, and you've created a point of failure that is unforeseen. And so we're kind of grappling with that. And to add on to your talk about security earlier, when you're building a network, cybersecurity should be in it. It's like the old Ragu commercial that's in there. You really should have smart cities in there too. When you're looking at building a system, you should think about not just cybersecurity, but what data am I getting? How am I putting this into the system, and who's going to be using it? When you look at the larger smart cities ecosystems around the world, the data sets are really supposed to be open. So if you take a smart cities pledge, you're saying, I'm going to take my data and I'm going to put it out there for any company to use, and then come up with solutions maybe that are unforeseen. Now that makes government guys shudder. I'm thinking that you put the data out there, and going back to the thing about money earlier, it's not necessarily the money, it's the contracting, where the contract might specifically limit what you can do with any information you receive while you're doing that contract. So you can't publish that data if you want to. And I mean, a lot of private companies don't want to, but you have some limitations on what you can do with that. So you have to look at it from a very basic level. I would hazard a guess, even Tyndall still has copper lines.
Yeah, please, Peter.
So it's nice, you think, hey, you get to build from scratch, but you have these contracting rules. And so we are building buildings, and then we'll have these things called utilities that connect to and they're not built. So we're actually building the utility systems that go to the buildings, and the buildings, we have building CDC that's 90% complete. It still doesn't have the water to it yet because that utility hasn't been run to it yet. Oh, we're still flying planes. We're still doing missions on the flight line, but we're building hangars, but we don't have utilities to those hangars.
Porta potty
So,
outside.
yeah, so it's kind of nice to build from scratch, but that whole network, that's not there. We're having to put it in as we're building buildings, and that adds to that complexity.
Absolutely.
So if I could add to that, now this is something I can sink my teeth into. While I'm no cyber expert, and again, would rely on these guys, being able to articulate to our leadership across our communities, on base or off base, to tell them why having a smart base and the smart base capability in there, and why the old systems that we already have in place, why that's important to replace, that is something that we can all work on to build the vision of that community that we want for the future. The problem that we get into is who's paying for that? Where does that come from? How do we articulate that on what the cost savings are going to be? And that's part of building that vision for them, right? So a lot of our political leadership have no clue what you're talking about when we're talking smart cities. In fact, I had one politician who told me that he doesn't know what a smart city is, but he knows he has to be one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that put it back on me that I needed to be able to explain the things that he needed to do for that community overall. But again, it comes back to most of our bases, most of our communities are relying on pretty old technology that they have in place that we now have to replace. Not all of us have the opportunity to build from scratch, and in fact, I would say none of us really want to have that opportunity. That's a terrible way to run it. But now we need to figure out how to get it up to where it needs to be.
So, yeah.
Real quickly, one subject that's come up a couple of times during this conference is technological debt. Like, you are so far behind your roads, your infrastructure. You would have to pay a lot of money just to get you to where you should be, not less where you want to be.
Right.
And that's
No.
a problem with the military, and it's a problem with a lot of our cities and infrastructure in the United States.
No, yeah, thanks. And we spoke about digital twin, spoke about critical infrastructure. We touched on privacy, which kind of is important because how do you balance the need for data collection and privacy, because you have contractors, civilians, military, that angle definitely want to kind of touch upon to understand. From a privacy perspective, Peter, if you could help us understand how you have visualized data privacy with collecting all this data as part of your smart city digital twin, because all that is all about data going back and forth.
Yeah, the privacy is an issue. My son's in IT, and he works for a doctor's office, and he was telling me one of the doctors had Microsoft Works on his computer. I got it on Windows 10, I have no idea, but that was all his patient's info, and it's hard keeping that. It's not necessarily, you can have the most secure system, it's also the people and getting them to understand. In the military, the toughest customer usually is our leaders, trying to tell them, well, I want to get on quickly. The exec wants to have my passwords so he can log in for me, and I can just show up, do my thing, and walk away. And trying to explain, well, would you want others to do that? And then it becomes unsecure. So one of the things with privacy is making sure leadership follows those same rules, logs in properly, doesn't leave their computer, logged in as they walk away, making sure people cover each other.
Yeah. So Mike, from a technical perspective, data privacy, data protection, comments?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. It's a difficult task to achieve. The first thought that comes to mind is we do quite a bit of work with the DoD on tactical networks. And in that scenario, privacy and data protection is the utmost importance. There can be no leak, and so we spend an awful lot of time on those networks ensuring that there aren't, and using some of those techniques that maybe I went into too much depth on earlier to accomplish that. So it's really, really important, and HIPAA is one, defense is another. There's areas where you just can't compromise data privacy, and we attack that from a network layer. There's lots of other areas. There's your data management tools. There's other security tools. So you've got to look broadly at that problem.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I think one of the important things we all talk about in the government is certification standards. So why do we start with Mike? Security standards, smart city standards, NIST, what about European standards? How does it all, in your mind, how does that all come together?
So there's a pretty well-defined standards process for our fixed line equipment going into government networks. At least in the DoD side or in the IC, we've got to go through JITC testing, FIPS testing, NIAP, and that's a process. It's very, very heavyweight. They over-rotate on security on the systems, in my opinion, although that's a difficult thing to suggest because you always never want to compromise on security, but one of the consequences of that heavyweight system are delays in technology adoption. So when the peer networks in Verizon, AT&T, Google are able to adopt equipment as it's GA, oftentimes the DoD's waiting 1.5 years to 2 years for these certs to catch up. On the 5G side, we've been transacting and deploying on OTAs, and the certifications aren't there yet, which has been great from an agility perspective in some of these experimental deployments and the other deployments. But we're anticipating that the Department of Defense is going to come along and impose a certification process on that wireless equipment exactly like they do on the wireline side, and we'll be in a similar boat. My only hope is that as they're building that one from scratch, they can take some lessons in and maybe improve the speed and add some agility to the wireline certifications that we have to work with JITC, NIST, and FIPS, NIAP and FIPS.
Yeah, Peter, your thoughts on that? Well,
So, with military standards, yeah, we have them. A lot of times people ignore them, but we do set them. The RMF ATO process is very rigid. And so, using that, I think we can continue. I'm one of those people who believe we can change passwords. One, if I told every one of you have to go back to your office and tell everybody they added 4 more digits to their password, you can hear them moaning right now. Passwords are, though, the only way to protect our resources. It's the keys to our thing. So making sure people use them, that's one way. But things get broken. Things get broken into. There's always the next person. So we've got to keep up with the technology as best we can. And the military is not good with that. We don't really change very quickly. But we also find vulnerabilities, and that's why we don't change. If you have an iPhone, you can't upgrade to the next one, even though it's ready until they test it, because there's always backdoors that they worry about. So, thank you.
Paul?
Yeah, I do think you're starting to see some standards kind of develop, right? When we were working with some solutions with the Air Force, one of the things that came back is we don't want to do this until we know what we're going to do with the data. Where are we storing the data, who has access to it, and what's going on? And so that shows to me a certain level of maturity or desperation, depending on how you look at it, right? Because you got to pay for that. But then you also look at, when you're looking at using the data down the line, how do you anonymize it? Are you doing it in a way that can, like smart cities, one of the things that's a real big covenant there is marginalized communities. So minorities, handicapped, elderly, financially at risk. How do you help those communities? A lot of times they get ignored. And you're seeing, going back to your stuff with sensors earlier, the EPA has had some contracts going out where they're putting sensors in communities that are impacted by traffic or by chemical plants and stuff like that. And how do you monitor that rather than waiting for the lawsuits decades later? So they are learning some of these lessons and getting that data in the right place, but you still have to be careful how you store it, how you aggregate it, and who you share it with.
So Dan?
Yeah, one of the things that I would like to add to that, from a community perspective, is you're never going to convince the community that they need to change their password every 30 days and 16 characters, all uppercase, lowercase, special characters, numbers. You're right, not going to happen. But why are we continuing to rely on that anyway? What are the new technologies that we can use? Two-factor authentication. What types of systems that we could use now to get away from passwords that certainly the rest of the society is using, and then what is going on in the future that our researchers are going to be able to come up with that would eliminate even that. I'd be excited to see that, but I also worked inside the fence line for most of my career, probably 30 years of my career. So yeah, I get that we're probably going to be relying on passwords in the future, but gracious, I would love to see that go away.
If I may, we've done quite a bit of work with the financial community, and that's exactly what we saw is, those guys are making a lot of money on really highly secure networks, so they can afford to put biometric type systems and things like that in. That's a great way to secure it down. And of course, you mentioned two-factor authentication. That's great. Everyone absolutely should be doing that. That's a great way to keep bad actors out or sloppy passwords a little bit in check.
Yeah, that's two-factor is pretty much basic, I guess. And I was having conversation with some folks on the floor about CMMC, and CMMC level 1 is not that hard. It's like basic cyber routine. But to that point, I'll start with you, Dan, and this is closer to your heart. What role do occupants play in maintaining the cybersecurity of a smart base, and how can bases better educate their residents about their role?
Yeah, that's a hard one. So I think we need to be upfront and honest with not only community but base personnel and their families to let them know what the threat is and what the capabilities are, and to teach them. And I would recommend that we start training because, oh, by the way, some of the issues with all of this is how we're building the workforce of the future. And if we're not starting in the 3rd grade, once those kids have learned to read, as they're reading to learn, teaching them the STEM professions and the things that they need to know to be able to succeed in the future. That is absolutely critical. And this could be a part of that. And guess what? They're going to go back and tell their parents that they're doing it wrong. Because that's what kids do. So that's where we could start to train them and get them excited about that aspect of it. But on the other side of that too, we need to be, as leaders, need to be looking at the folks in our offices and telling them, okay, here's the threat, here's why you got to do it. But again, we have to come up with solutions that absolutely make sense. When I was over in Iraq, I was changing my password every 30 days, 16 characters, you know the drill. And that's painful. I can't come up with that many. So you start doing patterns. And everybody knows those patterns that you're not supposed to use, but you end up doing it because that's the only way that we can do that. We're human beings. We can't remember those type of things that well. And that goes also, if we're being open and honest to our community, they're going to understand why we're doing the things that we're doing. So one of the things that we did, I talked about building the digital twin in the city with license plate readers. Those are cameras all over the city. One city over, they tried to put red light cameras in the town, and the town about exploded. Didn't pass through press. They absolutely, oh my goodness, this is awful, almost had a revolution, and they shut it down, decided, nope, we're not doing it. We were able to do that because first we developed the system, got it deployed, then when the press came in and started asking questions, we said, hang on, we're going to show you all the positive data of why we're doing this. In the end, one of the things that we did was a gentleman had kidnapped a young girl and was taking her across border, but because we were able to use the license plate reader, we were able to track that person through the state and capture him before he left the state. And she's perfectly safe and back home. And we got multiple examples of positive. So once you start telling the people, here's the positive outcome, they will come on board and realize the impact of that. So it's both sides. We have to be open and honest, tell them the positive aspects of why we're doing this, but we also have to be smart with how we're doing it.
So Peter, just kind of from your perspective, in your base, how have you kept up besides the regular once-a-year cybersecurity 30-minute course that everybody has to take?
So I think the younger generation understand it better, and that's why we have marketers, they target the older folks, right? They call them up, give me $6,000, the simple stuff like that. I scared a young sergeant that was working for me when I told him, when I was a lieutenant, came in the Air Force, you wanted to cash a check, there was no ATM, so you had to cash a check, and you went to the BX, and you gave him your check, and you had your name, your social security number on that check. So we had printed checks with social security numbers, and then I would go to Target, give them a check to pay for something, and my kid's like, really? I said, that's what we did back then because it wasn't a problem. So what's today's issues that people are giving away that you do on the internet or wherever your games you're playing? What information you're giving may be secure today, but what is it going to be in 5-10 years from now? So part of it was scaring them a little bit into making sure they're safe.
Yeah. Paul, quickly.
So, two things. People are dumb, and they're dumb in predictable ways. I was telling my children about how I came up with my first password. It had something to do with a video arcade back in the 80s, right? I found out about 2 years later, 2 of my children were using that password. and I was like, it's like you're making it worse. It's not generational, it's not family, but it's entirely predictable for stuff like that. And I think within the smart cities, and this goes back to what Dan was saying, is we're not really good at telling the story about how the benefits are really impacting citizens. What we hear is a lot of these horror stories. Atlanta is, I believe, in the top 10 connected camera cities in the world. And they have a very large public-private, you've got Home Depot, Coca-Cola, UPS, Delta, that are all connected into the city's police department. There was a case recently where somebody was getting gas, made the mistake of objecting to being robbed. He got killed. Within 2 hours, or something in that time frame, they'd caught 2 of the guys because they tracked them through several counties into Atlanta. And within 24 hours, they caught the other ones. And it was all through these cameras. So what does that say? One, the interagency system works fantastic when it
Good works, yeah.
And it can work. And those are benefits that you don't hear in the press very much. You do hear that we caught them, but you don't hear why. And sometimes the police don't want to share, we do have cameras everywhere and we are watching you, because that's a problem in and of itself. Yeah. But those resources are there and they work fantastically.
Yeah, I'm surprised Atlanta is more camera is more than City of London, which is, you have cameras pretty much in every corner. But again,
my church has 60 cameras on the campus.
Jeez.
And there's a guy on Sunday watching 60 cameras in the parking lot.
Yeah. He sees everything. So we'll have time for questions for the audience. But the last question I have, and if you can start with Peter, what do you see the future of smart bases with the advancement of technologies like AI, 5G, blockchain, and everything else that is coming at us at 100 miles an hour or 1,000 miles an hour?
Well, like I said, I'm old, so I'm scared because I see more and more technology out there, and my fear is the analog is leaving us. I saw a cartoon recently about the time lady when you had to call someone to ask what time it was. Kids don't wear watches anymore. If their phone goes out, they can't tell time. My worry is the technologies keep getting better and better, but the problem I foresee is we rely on them too much, I think. We're at a point, and we say it's the younger generation. All right, how many of you checked your email today? It's not just the younger generation. So that's my worry about the future of technology.
Thanks. Paul?
So I think particularly we've been working with the IT/OT issues. So when you connect things that weren't designed to be connected, you're introducing an element of the unknown and a potential point of failure. And that's everything from the brakes on my BMW, which now have a sensor. If the sensor goes out, in my head, I'm told that the brakes aren't working, even though physically they're still working. Something just interrupted the sensor. It does. So, and the thing is, when you're getting into a military environment or critical infrastructure environment, sometimes you're making assumptions based on data that was created to be overly safe, like the HVA systems. And when we were at Maxwell, they had a room that wasn't properly ventilated, and they wanted a sensor in there so when the temperature went up, they could send somebody to take care of it. But what happened is you're creating these problems. So how do we attend to that? And digital twins are a good solution to a lot of it, but it doesn't, because we can't predict everything. So that's my big fear, is that we're adding a lot of points of unknown into a system that we really haven't fully realized yet.
Right. Dan?
So I'm old and I'm excited for this technology. I cannot wait for the digital age to come. In fact, I am no longer analog in my note-taking. So don't have to be connected to the network because everything is contained on here. But yes, to your point. But for the young kids that are over there, I bet you they would say, why in the heck do you need this big of a screen? Because they're used to the small screens. That goes to the question, what is the next screen? Where are we going next? So I'm pretty excited about the things that we're going to be seeing. How does artificial intelligence impact our day-to-day lives? So if the cars that you're driving today, are we going to need cars like that in the future? Or is autonomous driving going to take over? So many cool things that are going to be coming down the pike at some point in the future. I cannot wait to see it. But that's just me.
Yeah, we're right in the middle of a huge change, and we're, the first thing that sort of comes with these smart bases or cities or communities is the networking infrastructure. That's like the baseline, the foundation. That's kind of what we do. And then on top of that foundation, you get to see the structure built, and that's the integrated smart devices, the applications, the digital twinning, and then the automation of that information and then the feedback loop to kind of improve things. To me, we're just at the very beginning of this journey, and we're really, really excited to see the benefits as these applications develop. One story when I talk about 5G, I gave a talk on it at a subsea summit of all things, but this device here came about in, depending, around 08, 09 or so. It more or less coincided with the deployment of 4G. And that completely revolutionized the way the consumer interacts with the internet. And it created trillions of dollars of market cap when you think about companies like Facebook and Amazon and Google built basically on this device and the connectivity associated with that device. 5G is all about connecting communities and enterprises and government in a very, very scalable way. And we're rolling that connectivity out now, and as that connectivity becomes available, we expect those applications to come in and sort of create that same value. That's the promise of where we're headed.
I would add about connected devices as well. You got billions
Indeed.
of IoT devices.
Yeah, indeed. I should have been very clear about that. I meant in those market segments, it's not human to human anymore. It's device to device communications.
Thank you. At this time, we'll take any questions from the audience. Any questions around? Yeah, please come up to the mic if you can.
I don't know if I'll need this mic. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay, Tony Woolridge, Arthur Grand Technologies. My question is actually kind of split between Peter and Dan. So I was thinking from a tech point of view here, as is would be Warner Robins, because your buildings are in existence. 2B would be Peter, because you're rebuilding Tyndall. By the way, I'm a Panhandle girl, so I get it. Bay County to Jackson. How do you handle the SCADA systems that are really kind of antiquated, really for you, Peter, in our home state? If you're going to be a smart base surrounding a smart city with systems that are older than you and me.
So our IROC system we're building, we're going through the cloud, and we're putting all that data there. So we're trying to get away from the base system. The base has their own little system, Air Force Net has their own system, and we're trying to get away from it into that cloud environment because we can. Number one, it's large parts of data. We can avoid the antiquity of the AFNet system. Working with the communities, not so much. It's a little harder right now. We are trying to connect to them using our system through the 911, but their system is very old. My own security forces on the base, they have intrusion detection systems. They have one system that's on Windows 11 coming up and that we're putting in, and some of the buildings are still on Windows and NT system. That's how old it is. So we're trying to replace those. That's the only thing we can do. But it's hard because you can't just hook them back up to a new one. You have to actually put the infrastructure in each building too for that. So it's a challenge. You still have copper, he was talking about, get rid of copper. We still need copper because all our fire alarms and elevator alarms all go through copper, not fiber. So if you don't have copper, you can't put an elevator in. So it is a challenge. The best we can do is just try to modernize where we can.
And Dan, when you have RMF requirements running out of your ears at Warner Robin, how are you handling it with the older systems in your smart city?
So I'm a vision caster in the community. I go to the political leaders and other leaders across the community and explain to them why we need these systems and how it's going to benefit them. And in the end, that is the only way we're going to convince leadership in our communities why they need to invest the funds, the public funds, into these programs. What is the benefit? Otherwise, they're going to continue with the same systems they have. The problem with that, from a purely practical perspective, if I have my city that is on 1G and 2G systems, because that's all they need to have their systems operate, yet I have my base that's on 4G and 5G, yeah, there's a big disconnect. And guess what? They're going to have some connections to the base, so that creates a threat vector. But the leadership isn't going to hear that. They don't want to hear the negative story. They want to hear the positive. What are the good things that I can do? Because I need to be able to explain that to my constituency so I can get reelected next election. So being able to tell those stories of why this is important and why it's exciting for the community, I think is key to doing that. One of the aspects that I've embraced is building workforce of the future. So if I can tell my leadership across the community that you're telling parents that by embracing these technologies, their kids are going to be able to get high-paying jobs in the community here. They don't have to leave to go up to Atlanta and to get a job in the software community up there. They can stay right here in Warner Robins. Yeah, they're going to be pretty excited about that. So trying to build it from a negative story to a positive story is the key. At least that's what I have discovered over time.
So is there a plan for a community bridge between government and?
It has to be. There's no bridge. The two are the same. Installations don't have fences. Not anymore. Not when it comes to
But funding is
technology.
separate. Funding is different.
Not necessarily, and that one is rather interesting. If you can find the grants to be
That's
able
what
to
I'm
attack
listening
it.
for.
Yep.
So there's a grant
There are
vision
grants
there.
out there, absolutely, and there are going to be more grants. Build Back Better Regional Challenge was certainly one of them. The CHIPS Act is another one. They're looking at other grants to be able to develop. But again, it's about creative writing, right? You need the grant writers that know how to take the language within those grants and then convert it into what it is that you're trying to do. And again, that's storytelling. So how are we building the workforce of the future? It's all about the story that you tell.
Okay.
Can I add to that real quick? A story. 2011, I was in a meeting, and this general was they were trying to take all the legacy maintenance programs out there and supply and re-up them and redo it all. Just so much data, but they were all separate legacy programs. And she explained to us they spent $2 billion and it didn't work, so they scrapped it. So think of that from a U.S. citizen. You just heard me tell you we spent $2 billion
And it didn't
got
work.
nothing out of it.
Yeah.
Those legacy programs are tough.
Yeah.
They are tough to move and upgrade.
I mean, we talk about modernization across forces, but our forces are really inside of really commercial and civilian communities. So I just want to make sure there's a way we can actually reach it, and we're really not so siloed and isolated on camps, posts, and stations.
So
Okay.
one of the things that we were talking about is, Robbins has 24,000 people. It's the largest employer in the state of Georgia, okay? Which is a marketing term. How many actual employers are at Robbins?
Oh, quite a few.
Even within the Air Force, you've got AFRC, AFLMC, you've got the 116th, the 55th, the 78th. That's just Air Force. And there's got to be over 100 contractor companies on the base. So when you say that it's the largest employer in the state of Georgia, that's nice, but getting them to speak with a voice and getting them to all understand what you're saying is going to be a job.
Yeah.
So I want to give anybody else who had a question. Yes, please.
Hey, thanks. John Klein, Johnson Controls. And really appreciated the panel and your presentation. I'm a marriage counselor with Johnson Controls. We spend most of our time helping the IT community communicate with the OT community or the civil engineer squadron, and I'd be interested in your impression about what are the things that you've done that were successful to bring the two communities together. And then the second part of the question is, I believe, along with the Society of American Military Engineers, that the standards that we build and repair our buildings need to be modernized to make them smarter. The Unified Facility Criteria in the UFGS. And I'd like your thoughts on that. Thank you.
So the controls are a great question. Each base has separate control systems. We use Siemens on Tyndall, but other bases use Johnson. And part of that becomes an issue, but we were able to work around that. It is putting those standards, trying to set those standards. And I said earlier, we were talking about the ATO system. That's one we've worked with Johnson Controls now working with, because one of the next bases, that's what they have, and trying to get them into this IROC system. And we're working with Johnson Control, the Johnson company, to try to make sure what we're doing matches their criteria. And then what that'll happen is other bases who are having the same issues in their Johnson Controls, we're working with them. Siemens, same thing. We're working across that. So as we're building these new buildings, we're planning that, yes, that is part of our planning in the infrastructure, that we're going to need these controls, the differences. Some of it for HVAC, there's not a lot of difference. It's just conduit that we need. So when we build the buildings, it's not that hard. But we are working with it, trying to match up as best we can.
And the last question from, I'm sure, which will be a really tough
Last
one.
but not least. So, Dan, Tony Brown with TM3 Solutions, and my AFCEA roles, I wear several hats, so I'm not going to go through them all. I am helping out a city, 2 of them. Is there a Smart Cities for Dummies, right? Is there some boilerplate that you go to, right? I have that as one question. For the rest of the panel, with AI and other scenarios that we're talking about with smart cities, it looks like we could lose some blue-collar type of jobs. So I was happy to hear you mention about retraining. But is there a ratio of, public works folks that we lose when all these sensors start to kind of take over what they would normally do? It seems just a big task and with the Air Force Base, I mean, I'm in Florida, by the way, also. Sea levels rising from, just so many different things. How do you look at the whole scope? Are there white papers of like coastal cities and then, other cities internally, or big cities like Atlanta? It just seems so daunting at this point.
So from my perspective, and I'm going to answer the second question first, it's not that dire. I don't think you're going to lose as many jobs as you think, because those people, those exact same people, for instance, on a SCADA system, I do not want to bring somebody in who doesn't know air conditioning systems to run the SCADA on an air conditioning system. They better know the systems. So you're going to want somebody that's trained in those capabilities to take over that job. It's a change in how that job is being done, but it's not elimination of the job itself. Additionally, we're already short-staffed everywhere. What this does is it frees up the manpower in, for instance, at Robins Air Force Base, it is the leader in Department of Defense on robotics capability. That was per congressional testimony. We've got 38 robots deployed right now, and the jobs that they're doing, and it's AI-driven robots, the jobs that they're doing are the things that we don't want people doing. And that is involved in heavy chemicals that could cause them damage, where you don't want people dressed up in suits during the day and being in danger. It eliminates that capability, and you put the robots in danger. They don't care, they're going to do it. So that, to my estimation, unlike the first industrial revolution, I think the fourth industrial revolution is more about increasing capability, less about replacement of jobs.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, so
Okay.
if you can network with the panelists, again, thank you so much all of you for participating.